Welcome! In this video, you will see a demonstration of a sunflower still life painting. Here is a shot of my palette with the colors I used in this painting. I start with a toned panel. I used burnt sienna and Indian yellow with some mineral spirits to coat the panel before I started, and I wiped it down with a rag to give myself a nice background to paint on. You see me here starting to sketch out my design onto the panel. I am again using this combination of burnt sienna and Indian yellow and mineral spirits to sketch this on. It goes on quite quickly and I keep it very loose. I use this as my roadmap so I don't get lost in my painting as I start adding color. Don't know about you, but I just love sunflowers and they are so much fun to paint. So here I'm giving myself just like the general direction of the petals on this sunflower. It's again just very loose. I also give the general idea of where the leaves are. I use positive and negative spaces to really try to get the proportions right. I also like to sketch out some of the design on the pottery. Again, this is just to help me when I start using the colors so I don't get lost. So at this point, I'm ready to start moving into color. I'll be starting with my darkest dark. I do this because the darks tend to get milky if you wait till later to put them in. That picks up on like your titanium white and other lighter colors that you have already put down on your panel. I'm using a combination of burnt umber, French ultramarine blue, and permanent rose here to get this dark. It's almost black, and I'm working around just trying to see where some of those darkest darks are and just giving myself a little bit of it. Next, I'll be moving to a little bit of a lighter color, actually quite a bit of a lighter color. It's burnt sienna, Indian yellow, and burnt umber. And this I'll be working in the head of that sunflower again to start picking up on some of the highlights in there. I'll be working back and forth between that color combination and the dark combination that I have mixed up to start sculpting the shape of that center of the sunflower. At this point, I'm mixing up my base color for the sunflower petals. I am using a Hansa yellow and permanent rose and some Indian yellow. Just gives a very, very warm tone for the base of this. As I work further on this painting, you'll see that I'll be adding lighter tones over the top to start to shape the petals. You can see that at this point it's very loose. I'm just trying to get that color blocked in. So here I'm starting to put the dark tone for the green in. I'm working on blocking in the petal of the leaves and anything else that's that dark colored green in this painting. Again, just very, very loose. I like to keep my paintings very loose. I try really hard not to be tight. And I've switched to like a medium tone in the green. In the green that I'm using, I use a combination of that darkest dark that I mixed up earlier, which was the burnt umber and French ultramarine with some of that permanent rose in it. Then I add a little bit of cadmium lemon yellow, and that just pushes it towards the green spectrum for me. You can see how the wind was blowing. You can see the light from the shadows from the trees. It was very windy. That's why I'm doing this voiceover, because I don't think you would have been able to hear me. So here I'm starting to block in the piece of pottery. This is always a little bit of a challenge because there's so much detail in the pottery that your eye sees and you want to try to capture it all, but I really like to try to simplify as much as I can. And I'm using a combination of that same green that I mixed up earlier for the leaves, but I've altered it a little bit by adding a little more blue and a little bit of titanium white, and by blue I mean the French ultramarine blue, and this separates it from the color of the leaves and gets it pretty close to the match that is on the piece of pottery itself. So I'm just quickly trying to work around this piece, trying to see where I see this this green, and just putting it in place, putting it down where it needs to go. Again, not exact, just really, really loose. This is where that road map comes in so handy, because there's a lot of like little organic forms in this piece of pottery that I want to try to keep clean colors going. So by being able to see where those spaces are that are supposed to be different colors, I am able to keep it clean. All my colors will be clean on this. As I'm doing this, I go back and forth between a darker version of this mixture and a lighter version of this mixture to give the sense of light and shadow on the pottery as well. There you see me reaching for my Quinacridone Magenta to add it to my palette, because next color that I'll be mixing up is that really pretty purplish tone that's in that pottery. And at this stage, I have been using a bright brush, which is basically like just a flat brush that just has a square tip on the end. I find it gives me very clean lines when I'm applying the paint. And I can turn it different ways and angle it just to give me different strokes. So here I'm just trying to get that purple color in where it needs to go. Okay, so now I'm working back into the head of the sunflower. I've switched back to my yellow. This time I'm still using the Hansa yellow. You'll have to forgive me because that particular yellow, I have a hard time pronouncing it, and I'm most likely not pronouncing it correctly. But I'm going back in with the yellow and starting to try to mold and sculpt those petals on the sunflower. refining the center of the sunflower further. Using some of that color from the center around the edges to work it into the petals a little bit to give it a sense of different shades and levels in those petals. You can see how it starts to really make that center feel sculpted, have more dimension to it. I also like using long-handled brushes because it allows me to be further back from my painting, and it allows me to see it better and be able to make corrections, see where I need to make corrections. And sometimes I even close one eye and kind of squint it and try to make it so I just see the highlights and the shadows, so I don't get too muddled in between in the medium tones. And here I'm working again back down on the piece of pottery. It's just trying to find some of those shadows in there and refining it a bit. You'll see that I go back and forth between all the aspects of this painting as it progresses. I guess you could consider me a minimalist painter because I find a brush that I really like, and that brush usually does about 95% of the painting, and then I end up switching to a smaller brush to do some finer details towards the end. But so I always have oodles of paintbrushes, but I always end up gravitating to a favorite one. So now I'm trying to pull some of those other colors that I'm seeing in that piece of pottery. There's some like more of like a lighter greenish brown colors, and they help to form some of the drips that are on the glaze of the pottery. That this is a dangerous place right here because it's so easy to start getting too muddled and muddying up the painting with detail. So I try really hard to still keep those clean strokes and clean colors and try to put down that stroke right the first time so that it doesn't turn to mud. The more times you touch that surface, the more likely it is to start picking up those colors underneath. And here's an adjustment here that I'm doing. I felt that side of the pot was, that pottery was out too far, so I just trimmed it down a bit and added a little bit to the bottom and on the other side. That's what's nice about working wet on wet with oil paints, because you have that flexibility of adjusting it as you need to. You can even use a towel or paper towel to wipe out areas if you need to. Here I'm working on really trying to sculpt that handle on that piece of pottery. And again, I'm just trying to balance between the shadows and the highlights and working back and forth between them. It's always a fun challenge to interpret what you are seeing in front of you into paint. During this whole process, like I mentioned earlier, I am trying to pay attention to those positive, negative shapes to really keep my painting in proportion. I like to have points of reference that I'm comparing things to and making sure sizes and shapes are right or close to right. Here's a shot of my mixing palette. It was pretty messy. You can see I'm working away still. I'm starting to get the detail in that pottery to look like the piece of pottery that was in front of me. So now I'm switching to even a brighter yellow in the sunflower petals. I'm really trying to pull some of those highlights when the light hits it just right over on the stool there where it's sitting. It just really lights those petals right up. Pretty soon I'm going to have to start thinking about the background color and where it's sitting, what color I'm doing that. And I don't know if you can see it, but the wind had blown a petal down onto the stool, and I thought that looked really interesting, so you'll see me later on trying to work that in. I'm pushing some darker tones into the sunflower petals because there are some shadow colors in there, and that will just enhance those brighter colors and make them pop out more. At this point, I've got like a medium tone that I'm starting to add to that foreground, and you'll see as I progress, I'm going to mix up a much darker tone to try to catch the shadow that's kind of cast off in the back and behind this piece of pottery and sunflower. And this is a very neutral color. I use the same combination of colors that I started out with. I use the burnt umber, French ultramarine blue. In this case, instead of using permanent rose, I used Quinacridone Magenta. And you can see how dark that is. It is really pretty much black. And I could see the shadow off and behind it on the other side as well, but compositionally I did not like how that looked, and you'll see later on that I changed that. I'm working some white back in, but it's not really white. It's that same combination of colors with that I used to make up that dark with titanium white mixed into it. It just gives a nice gray color. Here we go. I had to get that sunflower petal that had fallen off. I used the same technique as I used above. I started with that really warm tone that I mixed up with the yellow and the Indian yellow and the permanent rose. And later on, I pull a highlight on it with some cadmium lemon yellow. Even in the shadows, you have to really pay attention to those positive and negative spaces. Otherwise, the shadows just will look out of place. And this can be tricky. So I work back and forth at this stage. I'm working back and forth with that the dark like black color with the lighter gray color, and start to really try to mold those shadows. whole time I was working on this painting. It was actually on the porch of our little playhouse out back, and my dog Oscar, he is quite the little dog, and, and I say little, but he's 65 pounds, but he's a good boy. He just loves just roaming all over that backyard and just chasing and smelling everything. So at this point you can see that I made that decision to alter that shadow that was off on that left hand side. Compositionally it just didn't feel right. It feels much better with having the shadow casting off on just the right side. Okay, so here I'm starting to work on the background. And again, I'm thinking of the painting and how it's going to look. So I want that sunflower along with the piece of pottery and the leaves to stand out from the background. So instead of painting that green grass that's behind there, I have chosen to use a combination of titanium white and French ultramarine blue, along with a touch of that dark color that was a combination of burnt umber, French ultramarine blue, and Quinacridone magenta, because it just helps to tone down that blue some. And I'm just kind of working around the whole outside edge of it. I'm letting it be darker towards the bottom of the background, painting in those negative spaces. It just trying to keep my paintbrush clean, trying not to touch the other colors that are already on there at this point. Just getting like a general fill in, a block in of that background. Now I'm gonna go in and pull a few spots out where I see that color peeking out in between places. And as I'm pulling it into the sunflower, I have to wipe my brush off or rinse my brush off quite frequently to keep it clean, so I don't muddy that background color with the yellow that's in the sunflower. And if I do pick up, like there, I picked up a little too much of that yellow and I put it back down, I just wiped my brush off and picked up some more of the color, the blue, neutral blue color of the background to paint over it. So now I'm adding some highlight colors to the leaves. When the light hits them just right, they have a little bit of like a glow to them. So I'm just trying to capture it here. I like to pull my strokes as well, the direction of the object that I'm painting. So if that leaf is going in that direction downwards like that, I try to pull my brush in that direction. It just helps to sculpt the leaf as I'm painting it. Some of those green color that's at the back of the sunflower head, I try to pop in some of that as well. It just adds another layer of dimension to that sunflower. And you can see some peaks of it through the petals at the base there as well. And that brighter green color that I'm using, it's a combination of the French ultramarine, cadmium lemon, just a slight touch of burnt umber just to tone it down a bit, and titanium white. And I work back and forth. I go back to that shadow color of the green that I mixed up earlier to work in places, and just kind of push it back and forth till I capture what I want to capture of those leaves. I like to give quick little pulls at the ends of my leaves and my petals, and that just softens the edge a little bit and just gives it a little bit more of an interest compositionally wise. Just gives it a softer appearance. I'm refining that center of the sunflower again, just trying to make sure that I have some darks kind of going out into the sunflower petals. It kind of helps to separate them a little bit. And when I'm doing this, I'm just using like the corner of that paintbrush to give little fine points. You see how adding a few points of that darker color around in the petals help to make the highlights pop out a little bit more. Here I'm using some of my cadmium lemon mixed with the Hansa yellow, just to really help to add some pops in the highlights on those petals and further sculpt them. I'm pulling some of the highlight color over the center of the sunflower there to give it a little bit more dimension, giving the sense of those petals that are in front on that side of the sunflower. So now I'm finally switching to a different brush. This is a very small round brush, and I am just hitting some of those shiny highlighted areas on that piece of pottery. This is what makes it start to really come to life, and I really enjoy doing this part of it. It just adds so much more dimension to it. Like adding those little shines that are on the drips of the glaze on the pottery. Here I'm refining that one petal that had fallen, and as you can see, the wind has completely blown it away at this point, so I don't have it on the still life anymore, but I just basically need to have a little bit of a highlight. And at this point, I just kind of start assessing the painting as a whole and try to refine anything else that I can see that needs to be refined, work on any of the edges that need to be softened or made clean, and just think about how I'm gonna finish it up. I like to look at my shapes and make sure that those are all correct as well. I will check my values, make sure the values are correct. Again, I'm just working around the piece, making sure those edges are correct. Cleaning up different places on the painting. At this point, the painting's almost complete. I hope you've enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed painting it. And if you did, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel. And in the description below, I'll add a link to my webpage if you're interested in viewing more of my artwork or learning more about what I do. 2 strokes on because it really makes it come to life as a painting.